Alrighty, welcome for our workshop and to be informed on the draft regional policy statements. I'll pass over to the team from ECAN. Thanks for being with us today. This is really interesting stuff, so let you lead us through it.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Zella Smith. I think I've spoken to you guys a few times now, so hi again. And this is Deirdre Francis. So we're just here today to give you an update on the regional policy statement. We've been working on this for a few years now. And yesterday your staff would have received a link to the draft in their inboxes to have a look through and provide feedback on. So today we're just going to run through where the review's at, just remind you of where it sits in the general planning documents, what we did leading up till now, how it's going to be a bit different, and we'll give you some examples of what's in it and how it works, and then we'll talk about the next steps and the opportunities for Council to contribute. So we are at the blue wavy arrow. End of May, Te Raupetuia, it's a joint working group of our councillors and the Runanga chairs for Canterbury, gave us the go-ahead to send a draft regional policy statement out for what's called Clause 3 First Schedule Consultation. So this is, it's not a notified hearings part of the process. This is a chance for specified stakeholders and stakeholders that we choose to have a good look through the regional policy statement and provide us with some feedback to help refine the regional policy statement prior to the full public notification and hearing process. So some of the stakeholders included are ones that we have to do, so that's the Ministers of the Crown and territorial authorities, for example, and then there's parties that we invite to be a part of this part of the process when we realise that they have resources and expertise that will help refine the regional policy statement before the full public opportunity to comment. So we've got it out for approximately a month for this kind of feedback. Then we'll be redrafting in response to that consultation. Then we go back to Te Raupetuia for endorsement to take it out for notification in December. So just to remind you all of what a regional policy statement is. So we've got the Resource Management Act. Sitting under that we have national environmental standards and national policy statements that provide direction across the country on how various issues are managed. Underneath that sit regional policy statements. They direct the regional and district plans and they help implement the national policy statements and environmental standards if necessary. So right, how we put it together, so how we got to where we've got now. We started off by collecting the current state of the environment and a bit of a recap on how things were going throughout the region. We went through some rounds of community engagement, including territorial authority specific engagement, some online, some in person. We did 2 different rounds of that as we refined our thinking on what needed to be included and what the key issues and management options were throughout the region. We worked alongside Runanga representatives, particularly the entity planners. I think you will have worked with staff from AEC, so we worked with those kind of people across the region. We took feedback and direction from the combination of our councillors and the Runanga chairs, and we rolled in the national direction that we need to implement. So the RPS framework, fitting it together. This is where we get a little bit different from the previous regional policy statement. Now, I'm sure you've all read it deeply, like I have. But it was very linear. You had an issue, an objective, and a policy, which is quite logical, but it siloed issues quite a lot. And I think we've all noticed over time that you can't do that to the environment and to communities, that there's interlinkages and crossovers between all sorts of activities and options and outcomes, and so you need to have things joined up better, and you can use 1 or 2 different things to achieve the same outcome. So we moved towards more of a matrix framework where policies and objectives across a topic work together to achieve outcomes. It might make it a little bit more, it might make it harder to read if you're reading it as a single document. However, it should make it easier to point to how as a region we want to achieve an environmental or a social or economic outcome, because you'll be joining lots of Lego blocks together, hence the picture. Right, now I'll pass over to Deirdre, who's actually going to give you something a bit more specific.
Okay. So we contacted your staff to see if there were any specific issues that you might want a heads up on, that you might want to specifically look at when you're reviewing the RPS. The highly productive land issue was one that came up. So pretty sure you'd be familiar with this, but this national direction came in October 2022, and it's about maintaining the availability of our good soils for basically productive purposes, for food and for fibre production, that kind of thing. It's intended to work alongside the NPS UD, and it really came out of a response to the fact that there was a lot of urban development spreading onto our highly productive land. We, as a regional council, are required to implement the policy and to set it up for your main role, which is you actually deal with it on the ground, whereas we have to set up the maps that show where the HPL is, and what happens on that HPL is pretty much set out within this national policy statement. So the mapping has been provided with what's been sent to your staff in terms of where the HPL is, and that's to be added to district plans later. So there's criteria within the national policy statement which tells us what we had to do to work out where HPL was. So it needs to be zoned into the district plan. It is land that was either general rural or rural productive, predominantly LUC 1 to 3, but it can be other types of land if there's potential, either based on current use or similar uses, for land that's not LUC 1 to 3 to be considered to be highly productive. And an example of that is land that's used for viticulture. They need to be large and geographically cohesive areas, not like little plots of land around the place, and also not land that's been identified in any strategic documents for future development for urban areas. And your staff sent us the list of places which have already been through your process to identify that they're future development areas. So those ones that have gone through the process of being identified in this strategic document and that have gone through a process through your council, they've been removed from the mapping.
So providing we make sure that we've told you they won't be included in the get tied up.
Yeah, providing they've gone through the process where they were in your strategic directions document, and then you as a council have considered those and made the decision that they will be FDAs, then they can be excluded from the HPL, and that's the shape files which have been sent to us by your staff.
We should be making sure we've got quite a broad scope of options available to us at an early stage.
District plan.
Yeah.
So you,
Yep. So the maps your staff now have, so they can have a look at them, and this is your opportunity to give us feedback once you've had a look at them as well. Okay, so the mapping is to be in the RPS, which has just gone out to you for consultation. Once it goes through the full process of notification and the maps become operative, then they have to be put into your district plan, but you don't have to go through a plan change process to do that. You can just put them in, and that's set out within the HPL NPS. So another area that your staff thought you'd be interested in hearing about is how we've looked at climate change through the RPS process. Basically, in all of the parts of the plan, we've looked at why we need to do something, what's the issue we need to address, and you'll be familiar with this with your own district plan. What are we trying to achieve? So what are the objectives, and then how are we going to do it? So what are the policy approaches we need to do to achieve those objectives? And then the RPS also sets out who will take those actions. So for climate change, it's integrated throughout the regional policy statement. There isn't a climate change chapter, so you'll find it in air, where there's policy about reducing greenhouse gases. You'll find it in energy, infrastructure and transport, where it's talking about the impacts of climate change on our important regionally significant infrastructure. You'll find it in the hazards and risks chapter, and it's also referred to in ecosystems and other chapters. So we know that risks are already high in Canterbury, and we know that some places it's going to move towards extreme risk in the next 25 to 75 years. So that's basically what the RPS is trying to address. And the aims are that where new development is put doesn't make things worse for the community, and for existing communities that are already facing the risks, that we have an adaptation planning approach to try and deal with those risks.
The concept is the regional policy statement works with the climate adaptation planning that you're also working.
And that kind of segues nicely into natural hazards. So the approach that natural hazards has within the RPS is what we're trying to do is we're trying to facilitate a consistent approach across the whole region, so that particularly people that work across different districts, that the approach is basically the same. The key changes from the current RPS is that, again, natural hazards is primarily addressed across 3 chapters rather than just in one, as in the current one. So in the urban development chapter, it talks about territorial authorities being responsible for identifying suitable places for development, and that takes into account natural hazards and the implications of climate change in the future. In the natural hazards chapter, there's specific policy for flooding, for landslides, for coastal erosion, for earthquake faults and for wildfire risk. And within that, it incorporates measurable hazard mitigation standards. So, for example, you'll be familiar with the fact that we already have stuff in relation to floor levels and flood scenarios, so it's continuing that through. And then in the energy, infrastructure and transport chapter, the natural hazards information is considered when we're planning for regionally significant infrastructure, so that we're looking at where we're putting things, and we're thinking about which is stuff you would be doing anyway, thinking about how we maintain functionality during and after a natural hazards event, so that we're thinking about all of that when we're planning for our infrastructure. And those are the ones that we've got slides for, but another one that you may be interested in is the approach to biodiversity and ecosystems. And again, it's across a lot of chapters, but there is a main ecosystems and biodiversity chapter. So it's an integrated and coordinated approach to ecosystems. And it's looking at, first, we want to maintain what we've got so we don't lose anything more. We want to identify areas of significant Indigenous vegetation and significant habitats of Indigenous flora and fauna, and that's the Section 6C obligation from the RMA. We want to protect the stuff that's at risk of irreversible loss, and that's defined in the appendices. And then there's a second tier of significance, so for the stuff that isn't at risk of irreversible loss but it's still significant, there are specific types of risk which come from the NPSOB that we're trying to prevent. Then we want to look at restoring and enhancing, and that includes through just providing for natural regeneration. There's that 10% Indigenous vegetation target, which is for both urban and non-urban areas. And then we talk about offsetting and compensation. So that's basically the hierarchy that we're looking at in terms of managing Indigenous biodiversity. So do you have any questions on any of those things? Or?
So on that last point, on that target, what is the current, if you've got a 10% target, what's the current?
For the district?
Yeah.
You've already got the 10%.
Right.
For the urban areas, we've only just received that information, and I'm afraid I haven't haven't been told what targets are yet, but I know there's a lot that needs to be added to in Christchurch. I'm not sure about Timaru, sorry.
Okay,
Just to
that's
clarify, did you mean what was the existing
Yeah, what's the
target?
existing, what's the
What's the
baseline?
baseline?
If
Yeah,
you're trying to
do
get
you
to 10%, what is it now? Yeah.
Yeah,
What are the rules now? Is there a
the
number?
rules.
Yeah, is there a percentage that we're...
Is it 7% now and you want to get to 10%? Is it?
No, we don't have rules in the existing RPS. What we have is a policy for wanting to increase biodiversity,
Yeah.
but there aren't numbers, but this one kind of has that percentage. And where you're already at 10%, you may want to set a higher target, and that's something that is done in discussion with Mana Whenua, the TA and the Regional Council.
And landowners?
Sorry?
And landowners?
Not required, but there's no reason why you wouldn't.
How can we set a target around, when it will, how do we set a target across the district when we don't own the land?
I think as a process,
Yeah.
you would involve landowners, it makes sense.
Yes, yeah, okay, yeah. But you're just talking high level.
I'm just talking high level about what's required.
No, that's cool. One other question, and I'll pass to the others. On just note, changes the likes of Te Mana Otewai coming through. How's Environment Canterbury dealing with that? I know different regional councils are having different approaches with their regional policy statements. You know, national government's given an indication of where that's going to head. Yeah, what's ECAN's approach versus what we're getting from government, I guess.
At the time of writing, we have to work with what the legislation is at the time.
But we are aware of what's likely to come, and we've tried to build the building blocks of the RPS in a way that we can quickly pivot if or when we need to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a moving feast, isn't it? Yeah, no, that's cool. Sorry, I won't hog the mic.
Actually, probably more a question for your governance team, but why would you even proceed with this work when you know that there's so many changes coming ahead? You say at the time of writing you need to meet what's the law is the law until it changes, but given the extended time frame to enable to get this in place, why has ECAN not just hit pause on this work?
The extended time frame is more related to an actual regional plan rather than a regional policy statement. We were kind of pushing our luck by calling this our freshwater planning instrument to start with. But yeah, that discussion has been had at council level quite vehemently, and the majority of council decided that we needed to cement the work that we'd done to date to keep moving forward for the region.
It worries me that there'll be things in there that are no longer in line with the Resource Management Act or the National Policy Statements, as Nigel's alluded to. How hard will it actually to get that stuff back out? Because I feel that there'll be end up with things in there that you've then got to go through this lengthy process to get back out, whereas wouldn't it just be better to pause and wait and get it right?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. We did, as I said to Nigel, we did try to build it in a way that was as immune as possible to those kind of changes, so really focusing on the issues throughout the region and options for managing those with an overlay of the national direction that we needed to implement, so that the foundation is still what is important in Canterbury. But yeah, that is a really good point in terms of should we have paused or not.
Another question, I think, did you say at the start we should have a draft of this in our inbox? Because
Your staff will.
you're going to share? 24 hours ago, I've been waiting for this.
I got it 3.5 minutes ago. You probably legislatively have to work through the process in a time frame anyway, as far as RPS, don't you? So, yeah, so it's sort of one of those things that need to keep going, and that reform, I guess, has been ongoing with RMA, and it could be for the rest of the decade. Who knows? A question for me. It's not that.
So in relation to this, we'll get that draft. Are we going to workshop that as a council and consider our feedback? Or how is that feedback loop going to work? Because it's not just a, yep, thanks very much, everybody who's interested in reading it, mainly a few
No,
of
no,
us
that's-
that'll affect.
No, I
We'll
think
have a huge amount of interest, others may not. But we should be workshopping it to get a group
Yeah.
consensus, otherwise it's going to be very one-sided with my feedback.
And also if there's a small team maybe of governance that have more of an interest, then maybe there's a wee focus group on that as well. But I assume that nod from the back that we'll do some sort of workshop. We can, yeah.
Yeah, and we're happy to support them as much as they'd like.
No, there's no one behind you, Paul. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Appreciate that support. Yeah, yeah, because I'm sure we'll have further questions at a later date. Yeah.
I've just got a question. So we give you a schedule that's in our draft district plan in terms of highly productive land. My worry is if we haven't quite got that right, are we in trouble there? Because I think about here in terms of our everything else around us is highly productive.
Yeah, there's opportunities through the process to refine this, but once the decision, like, there'll be a whole notification and hearing process, so this point in time isn't the point where we stop learning and refining that information, but there will come a point where there's a line drawn, a line on a map, and those lines on maps are often problematic, and we'll just have to keep working on that in the future. Yeah.
There's also provision within the HPL National Policy Statement that there is circumstances where you can allow urban rezoning on HPL, but you've got to meet there's basically 3 tests that you have to meet to be able to do that. So that would be something that your council would need to work through.
Question as well, if that's all right.
Sorry, Paul, we're just on live stream. Do you mind coming up to a microphone? Only because I was listening before, if you're off a mic, you can't hear it as well. So it's an answer without a question.
I'll sit one seat away so it's not weird. My question was, the NPS for highly productive land has a 10-year threshold in it. Our refresh of our growth management strategy had a whole bunch of future development areas under 10, and we had about 7 or 8 that were 10 years or beyond, because we were mapping it out to a 27-year horizon. This government's signalled a 30-year horizon in the NPS urban development. That's where they're going to head in that particular NPS. My question is, are those beyond 10 years currently out in this mapping and likely to come back in under the other NPS, or how is that going to work out? Or are they already in, those beyond 10 years?
If they're beyond 10 years, my understanding is they're out
Okay,
for now, anyway, unless that changes.
okay, thanks. That was my question too.
Just with the process, so you notify it in December 2024, but am I right in my understanding that it's not legally binding at that point and it goes through the submissions, whatever you call it, process? Or when does it become legally binding? And then I've got a second part to that question.
If I recall rightly, because there's not rules in a regional policy statement, it won't become legally binding until it's been adopted by council. So after the hearing process and the decision's released on it, then it goes to a council meeting, then it gets made operative.
So after December 2024, then the public will get a chance to submit on it, is that right? And then at some point there'll be hearings and then it'll go to your council to be adopted. So then what if our district plan, which is proposed and not yet adopted, what if that doesn't align with the new regional policy statement?
The absolute joy of resource management planning, right? These things never align. We probably wouldn't bother appealing your district plan because it didn't align with the regional policy statement. Other people might choose to do that, but I think you'd have a really defensible position that yours was built at the best knowledge and information that you had at that time. Yeah. So the brief where to from here, which I think we've kind of touched on anyway. So the blue boxes at the top are what our Te Raupu Tuia activities are. So that's how staff are informing councillors and iwi chairs over the next wee while. The green stuff down below is what staff are doing. You probably can't read any of it anyway. But basically, we're in the June, July 2024 period. So we're consulting with key stakeholders, as I outlined. We're briefing TA councillors like we are here today, and we're working with territorial authority staff and selected stakeholders to aid them in preparing their feedback. So that's where we could support Hamish and Aaron's teams if they want us there, but there could be chances that you actually don't want us anywhere near you guys while you're ripping the thing apart. So it's entirely up to you how you'd like to take it forward from there, but we do need written feedback from you. We can't just collect words like we would in a workshop kind of situation. And that's it, I think.
Thank you, I really appreciate that. So that's it for this workshop, isn't it? We'll give you a nod. Yep, perfect. So thank you, appreciate that, and we'll look forward to continuing to work with your team on this. Thank you.